Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, episode number 30. I see everything in black, in pain. Claude Monet.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood, when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by IFH TV, Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first Netflix-style streaming service for screenwriters and filmmakers. If you want to take classes on the screenwriting process and also listen to amazing interviews by the world's best and biggest screenwriters, IFH TV is for you. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv. Now, today on the show, we have writer, showrunner, Daniel Knauf. And if the name doesn't sound familiar, maybe the shows that he worked on has. He created HBO's Carnivàle, which is a cult favorite. If you guys have not seen it, there's 2 amazing seasons of it out there in the world. And I was a big fan of it when it came out in the early 2000s. And at the time, it was the most expensive television show in the world at the time. It was crazy how much they were spending on basically an unknown. He had never done anything of any major magnitude before then. So it was pretty amazing what he was able to do. And we talk all about his adventures in Carnivàle, being a showrunner of that show, as well as his writing method, his adventures inside the writer's room, and what it's like to be inside of a writer's room of a big show. He's also worked on shows like The Blacklist, Dracula, Spartacus, My Own Worst Enemy, and many, many more. And he's been around the block a few times, and he has a very, very interesting story of how he got into the business and how he got his first shot with Carnivàle and that whole process of a struggling writer, someone who just loved to write, but was not getting a whole lot of traction. And then one day, Hollywood came a-knocking, and I think he was ready. So we'll talk more about that in the episode, which was extremely enlightening and inspirational, to say the least. Now, if you guys want to watch the video podcast of this, it is on Indie Film Hustle TV, and you could go to the Indie Film Hustle TV video podcast to see us actually, me and Daniel, talk it out and see this interview live. It's really, really a cool experience to watch it. So if you want to do that, just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv. And now, without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Daniel Knauf. I'd like to welcome to the show Daniel Knauf. Thank you so much for being on the show, my friend.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
So first off, you have a very impressive career and resume. So we're going to get into a bunch of the stuff you've done. But first and foremost, how did you get started in the film industry?
Crazy story that. Whenever I do seminars sometimes, and inevitably it'll be like, how do I break into film? Which is funny anyway, because it's like because there's larceny is kind of hard baked into the entertainment business, and so the language reflects it. So it's like you don't hear people saying, "Well, how do I break into accountancy?" or "How do I break into plumbing or construction?" It's like, right. But no, we got to do a B&E to get into this business. So that question will come up, and it's like I'm singularly unhelpful in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was an insurance broker until I was in my mid-40s. I did that for like 22, 23 years. I ran a business. And And while I was doing it, I'd always wanted to be a screenwriter, and I'd studied creative writing in college and grown up in Los Angeles, and so I kind of had, and I loved movies. I mean, it was my favorite thing. But I had 3 kids, I had to raise them, and I had to make money, and there was a certain, lifestyle. I wanted to have a house and, be able to pay my bills and that kind of thing. So I kind of set it aside around the time I was 22 and got married, and it was like, oh yeah, this isn't what grown-ups do. And then around the time by the time I was 27, I was actually going insane. I mean, I was like literally, like, I was not a happy camper. And so I was going through this crushing depression, and I started writing again, and it brought me out of it. And I realized, this isn't something that I want to do. This is something that I kind of have to do. My brain's wired this way, and I need to be doing something creative in order to. It's like a shark has to swim. I have to do this thing. And so, so when people come up to me and say, God, I've always wanted to write. And I think, well, I've always wanted to be a bird. It's like, I don't have any choice. It's like, so I started doing that, and I focused on really developing my craft and writing screenplays and reading books about screenplays, Sid Field's book, Screenplay, and other books where some of them were useful, some of them were completely useless. Taking some seminars, going to UCLA Extension here in LA has some great classes, and just basically focusing on learning the craft and I getting some mentors. I had 2 very good mentors. My first mentor was Jan Fisher, who wrote The Lost Boys, and we met when I was in a workshop at UCLA, and ended up writing some scripts together. And she kind of took me under her wing and really taught me a lot. And then I hit my 40s, and I said to myself, and I'd put it off. I was thinking, you know what? I told myself, this isn't happening by the time I'm like 40. I'm just going to do something else. I'll write novels, because it's sort of a young man's game, and breaking in is as any 40 something year old, slightly overweight B&E guy will tell you, is probably a lot easier when you're in your 20s. And I thought, I come from a long line of like really sore losers. Like, we're the guys who flip the Monopoly board and throw tennis rackets at people.
Right.
My brother always says one of his favorite things. He goes, "Show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser." So I just said, I'm just going to take one more real run at this. I created a website called unmovies.com, posted the first acts of all my scripts that I'd written up to that point. And by then I'd had some success. I did sell a script in 1993 that ended up being a movie for HBO called Blind Justice. It was a Western, but then nothing after that. It was like, there was nothing.
Tumbleweeds.
It was kind of like, Chuck Yeager, bouncing his X-15 off of the stratosphere, it's like, wow, it's coming in too hot. And so I was really, the crust of a slump. So I just created this website and put this stuff on, and I got a call from a guy, Robert Keelbod, who worked for a guy named Scott Winant, and Scott was an Emmy-winning director. And he had told Robert, I'm tired of reading doctors, lawyers, and cops. Show me something different. And Robert found the first act of Carnivàle. And he contacted me. He says, I'd like to read the rest of your pilot. And I'm thinking, what pilot? And I remember, oh, yeah, that thing. I'd taken this crazy 200-page screenplay that didn't work and thought, maybe this isn't a feature. And I collapsed the first act into a pilot. And so I showed it to them, and I met with them, and they were very they were very helpful, and they told me I needed to do a Bible, and I didn't know what a Bible was. And I did this Bible for Carnivàle, and then we took it to HBO, and all of a sudden it was like they bought it, and I was executive producing and writing an HBO series. So I started my career at the very top of the heap. I came in, and it was weird because it was like nobody had worked with me. I'd never done another television show. I had no reputation in the business. I just came out of like left field, and I'm running an HBO series, and they're, they only would have like, 4 or 5 shows on at a time. It was a pretty, kind of a, high up kind of position. And for somebody who was really a nobody to be in. And, I actually got to a point, I remember reading on IMDb that there was like a rumor going around that I didn't exist, and that I was a pseudonym for David Lynch, which was like really flattering, but not really good for the brand, if you can imagine. And so I did this show for 2 years, and I really kind of hung on by my fingernails. It was a kind of a terrifying experience because it's a Shark Tank in there, and just to answer your question, it's like for me to give advice to someone on how to get in. I can't really say. And I didn't come in, I was a baby writer for a while, and I got a story editor job on another show, and then I, built that up, and I didn't do the same trajectory as most TV writers do. I know what that trajectory is. You graduate from film school, you pull every favor you can get, and you try to get into a writer's room, whether you're in there as a office PA and you're bringing coffee, or whether you're a writer's assistant and you're just taking notes. And that's really the way into TV writer. It's into TV writing. It's really a very much, it's very much like the old, getting into plumbing or shoemaking back in the joining the guild. But mine, I broke right through at sort of the top. And I've been working my way down ever since.
So you said it was a Shark Tank. Can you explain a little bit about what was about that experience that was the Shark Tank? Because, you have a very unique story. You're right. Most people don't start off running an HBO series.
Well, I wasn't running it.
But you know what I mean? Like executive producing it.
The first year Ron was running. Really the main reason, what it boils down to is there's a lot of money on the line, and they were putting a bet on an untested talent, and that's kind of terrifying for a major corporation.
It was like $4 million an episode or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was 3.75 in the first season, as far as I know, and that was at that time the most expensive show on TV. We had a huge cast, and we had extras and elements, and a lot of outside days, and some special effects, and so it was a hugely expensive undertaking, and they would have loved to have had a seasoned hand at the top, and that's what they kind of wanted to do. It was like, if we could find a guy who can take this other guy's crazy idea and make it work, I'm sure they would have scraped me off at some point. But they found to their horror. And I'm not saying this, to pat myself on the back or anything. This is what I've been told by other people who were involved at the time. They said what they found was nobody else knew how to write that show. And so they were stuck with me. And
so you wrote yourself a niche.
Really, what else? Basically what I did was I created, it's like sitting down creating a board game where everything you do well is something that wins that board game. And it's custom designed for every single thing you do well. And they realized, so I'm probably guessing to their abject horror, that, that they needed me and they couldn't get rid of me. And it would have been easier to get rid of me because I was so green. And from my standpoint, I didn't know the rules. And when getting into Hollywood and dealing with Hollywood people in the entertainment business is a lot like suddenly getting into a time machine, finding yourself in the court of King Louis XIV. And there's a whole battery of sort of kabuki-like rituals and certain things that have to be said and how they're said and pecking orders. And I remember I sent a memo out one time. And in the insurance business, you send a memo out and here it is, here everybody, here's what's going on, blah, I got called by one of the executive producers. He said, "What do you think you're doing?" It's like, "What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm sending out this memo about, some nothing." Mm-hmm. He climbed up my ass about, you have to put this person's name first and this person's name second and this person's name third. And so it was really a lot about just learning these weird customs and rituals and expectations. I also didn't know what was a reasonable ask. Like, was it a reasonable ask, if I said, "No, let's not do this." It's pretty easy if you don't have a really strong knowledge of physical production, and I didn't back then, to step on the anthill. And I did that pretty regularly. I learned I'm a quick study, and I learned, and I generally don't make the same mistake twice. I just make every possible mistake once.
Fair enough.
And so it was kind of a jarring, terrifying kind of experience in which I was kind of hanging on by my fingernails, at all times, and feeling like a stranger in a strange land. But I did the full 2 years, and in those 2 years, I pretty much learned the lay of the land. And so after that, I knew exactly how the sausage is made, and I really had a love for physical production, and asked a lot of people who were very knowledgeable questions, and learning about that. And so, since then, that was Carnivàle was kind of my film school. It was like
hell of a film school.
Yeah, I mean, there was an immense amount of there was money and stature and everything riding on that. I mean, the sad thing really is the expectations HBO had for the series were wholly unrealistic, mm-hmm. and that's one of the things that killed us. If we went on the air on HBO now, they'd consider us like an unmitigated success. But they were saying, we expect to score higher numbers with this show than The Sopranos. And the day I heard that, I was going, oh God, we are so dead, because The Sopranos is mainstream drama. And whenever you get into genre stuff, even more so back then than now, mm-hmm. Where genre has kind of, oozed into mainstream. Back then, there were people where as soon as Ben heals the little girl at the beginning of the show, mm-hmm. they're going to turn it off and they're not going to turn it back on, because they're going, that's not real, and there's some people, no matter how well, it doesn't matter whether they're listening to super good jazz or really crappy jazz. They just they can't differentiate, because they just don't like jazz or rap or country western. And for shows that involve magic or supernatural or whatever, if people aren't into that, no matter how good you do, you're going to lose that audience.
Do you think that Carnivàle would have had a better chance in today's environment, like on a streaming service, like to have a longer run?
I suspect we would have done our full run if it came out. If it came out, I would say even if it came out like 2 or 3 years after we did come out. We were really on the bleeding edge of everything. And people just weren't really ready for that show. And it would have been easier, too, because a lot of what we were doing in the first season, and the first season drags quite a lot. But a lot of it was about just teaching people the vocabulary of the show, mm-hmm. and so that they would understand. And there had never been anything on like that. It was just a really weird thing, I mean, it had kind of the cryptic aspects of Twin Peaks, but it was a period drama, and mm-hmm. there was some historical aspects that were based on true, situations and true events, and other things that were made up, and so we really felt like we kind of had to handhold the audience along for the first at least 6 episodes, so they'd understand what the rules were.
Now, you said a term, show Bible. For a lot of people who are listening, they might not know what a show Bible is. Can you explain what your process was being a newbie, putting it together?
Just so they don't feel, as though they're, as though they're dumb or anything. When Scott said, "Yeah, first we need to get a Bible," and I'm thinking, we all going to kneel down and pray they buy it. I was like, King James or the New American? Wait, what? Name your poison. A show Bible is basically a document that goes into the milieu of the world. First, you start basically with log line. Okay, powers of there's like on a war between good and evil is fought in the blasted landscape of the 30s Dust Bowl, whatever. So you come up with your sort of 3-liner or 2-liner log line. And then you start to elaborate on that. And you get into the world, the rules of the world. You might, like I like to use images just to set tone and give them an idea of what things are going to look like. And you talk about the history of all the backstory. You get into the description of it's a full-blown articulation of the bottom 3/4 of the iceberg, and talk about the characters' histories, descriptions of who everybody is and where they come from, and then you go into first season. This is your first season arc. That will be quite detailed. By episode 1, you do this. Episode 2, this, and then later episodes you're kind of increasingly shorthanding it and giving people an idea of where the thrust of the show is and what its destination is, when the show kind of ends. If it ends. I mean, a lot of shows end when nobody's watching them anymore. I mean, the most episodic dramas end when people are just tired of watching it, Mm-hmm. But this is a serial, and that's kind of what I put together for them. And what I did was a very complex thing to where people were looking at it and going, "Wow, is this based on like real people?" Because I got bored with it. I said, once I heard that description, okay, here's what you have to do. I started writing it, and I was going, God, this is like watching paint dry. And if I'm bored, whoever's got the misfortune of reading this thing, it's going to be, even more. It was headache inducing,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I started going, let's have a little fun with it. And what I did is I created the whole thing sort of from the point of view of this intrepid university professor who had heard about this Carnivàle and had done a bunch of research and gathered files about the actual carnival. And there were fake police reports and fake newspaper articles and fake religious tracts and all kinds of stuff that he kind of gathered and put together. There was even an interview with Samson when he's like 75 years old in an old folks home,
Mm-hmm.
And he's this sort of, angry curmudgeon, and just like, can you go out and give me some booze, and so I just had a blast writing it. And so they saw it. They'd never seen anything like that. And I've done that since on almost every show that I've developed, because I always figure, hey, why screw with success? But
have some fun while you're doing it.
I mean, it's like I keep hearing different things. Some people say you need to come in with every I dotted and every T crossed and trailers, promos, they shot, whatever, this whole thing. And then I hear other people saying the best bet's just to go in with a strong pitch. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the rules are anymore, the
Netflix and Hulu and those guys have thrown everything out the window as far as rules are concerned.
Very much so. And you really, it's like, they set up shop so far, kind of upstream, that they wield an immense, the world, and this isn't just in Hollywood, there's the golden rule, which is he who has the gold rules. And in Hollywood, that's very, very, very much operative. And, people like Netflix are sitting on billions and billions of dollars, and they say, okay, you get some, and you get some, and you get some. And I don't know what their, which projects, what makes them pick out what project or, whatever. It's really, sometimes I feel it's like that. There was this old show that was on, I think in the 50s, before my time, but it was called The Millionaire, and it was about a guy who would just go out to random people and give them $1 million.
Yeah.
$1 million. Which back in the 50s would be, you can buy an island for $1 million.
Now you can't even buy it. Now you can't even buy a house in Burbank.
Yeah, 4-bedroom house in Reseda, but with a swimming pool, probably. Sometimes I feel like that's what Netflix is now. Is kind of like all of a sudden, boom, you're gifted with it, and so it's a very chaotic market right now.
It is pretty insane. And I've talked to, I talked to a lot of people like yourselves who are in the business, who were in the business before Netflix. And I've seen them just disrupt this entire industry. And now players like Disney are showing up with their streaming service, and Apple just said, hey, we're going to put ours in, and Comcast, or I think it's AT&T, excuse me. They have one coming out. Like, there's so many of these services coming out, and it's really just changing the way everything is done.
Yeah, well, what's interesting too is the impact it's had on just the way people comport themselves. Like, I don't know who it was. I think it was Bette Davis, or one of those old actresses, was quoted as saying, "Hollywood's the one place on earth where you can get encouraged to death."
Very true. It's extremely true.
Or as I like to say, when people say, "Hey, it's good for exposure," and I go, well, "People die from exposure."
I'm gonna steal that line. I'm gonna steal that line.
That's a line on a death certificate. That's the cause of death.
He was exposed.
Exposure. So but it used to be that everybody was really super. I was talking to my wife about this morning, and I was just making this observation. It used to be that people were very, very sort of polite and genteel with each other. Mainly because you really didn't know whether this guy you just had every reason to believe is a completely talentless hack, okay, or just a straight up bozo. For all you know from your experience, in 6 years could be running a studio. You just didn't know, or could be the guy that everybody wants to do business with. So people were generally very careful with talent relations. You didn't want to. You wanted to, it would always be, God, we really love this, but it's just not right for us right now. We're developing something similar to it, or it'd be always that kind of. There'd always be, we love you, we think you're great, but my agent one time called me up. It was like the sixth thing that had not sold, and he says, "Yeah, well, they really love you," and I go, "No, they don't. They don't." Love me, because if they love me, they would buy shit from me. I could wipe my ass on a piece of toilet paper and submit that, and they'd base a show on it. Don't tell me they love me. But there was still that. It was just sort of out of not respect. I wouldn't say it's out of respect. I wouldn't say it was them being kind. It's not kindness. It was out of fear. It was fear that the person who's sitting in this chair right now with us maybe somebody we absolutely need to be doing business with later, so we don't want to burn any bridges. What I found lately in talking to other writers and stuff is Netflix, and maybe it's because I read a little bit about their internal culture of transparency and say what's on your mind, to be totally frank with people, and that's the way we do things, is there's a tendency for them to say, fuck off, we're not interested, go away. I mean, it'll be just like, fuck off, go away. And you'll go, what didn't you like? What? Fuck you. We didn't like it. Something didn't work for us, so go fuck off. And they don't give you feedback. They don't say what they're looking for. They don't want a follow-up meeting, and it's curt and it's harsh.
I heard that too.
And so it's like what does that bode well for them? If they come sniffing around later and, and they're not somebody I want to do business with, they're probably going to have to throw more money at me to get me.
And they'll have it.
Because they've got the money. But I just think, guys, there's a reason why there's so much ass kissing going on in Hollywood before you got here. And that's because you don't understand. Somebody who's at the very bottom of their game, living out of their car this week, in 6 months can be picking up an Oscar. That's the story of the guy who wrote Dances with Wolves. He was literally living out of his car, and a year later, he got an Oscar.
That's amazing.
You've got to basically treat people well, because people who maybe you don't need this week, you may need desperately in 6 months or a year. But again, it's like I said, it's all sort of part of the chaos right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't really affect my game. My game is I just do the best work I can and move forward. And I'm not a peripheral visionary. I don't look at what everybody else is doing.
You can't.
I just kind of, I do my own thing, and hopefully somebody responds to it.
Now, I've always wanted to ask you and also just someone like you who had that experience, that kind of lottery ticket win with Carnivàle. Yeah. What was it like when you got the call, or were you in the room? What was that experience? You're like, you're greenlit. We're going to make this show.
Oh, I can remember exactly what it was like when I sold the thing, because I was at my daughter's softball game. I remember where I was standing. I remember looking at looking at her mother and going, "Oh my God."
Our life just changed.
Well, it was like they're doing it. The problem was I'd never tried to get into TV before then, and so I couldn't fully appreciate how amazing it was. It was kind of like, of course they bought it. It's good, I guess. That's what. My dad, when I was like 17, he took me to Santa Anita racetrack, right? And it's just beginner's luck. I picked 7 out of 9 horses on the nose. And I remember sitting there and I was making these $2 bets. My dad's giving me $2 and I'd go make a bet. I'd go home with a couple of $100. And I'm thinking, maybe this college thing is overrated,
The track just seems much more easy.
So then I went back with a girlfriend, expecting to impress her. And I didn't, it's like, they were like, my horses, it was like they were shooting them out there. It was like, oh, yeah, he broke his front leg. Time to take him down. So I was totally humiliated and realized, oh, my God. And there were a lot of aspects of Carnivàle that were like that. I hadn't gotten beaten up enough to really fully appreciate it in the market. I hadn't spent a lot of time trying to network or sell things. What I'd done is I'd spent 20 years really honing my craft, and that was good. And if I was going to do it I'd rather do it that way than the other way. I don't think Hollywood's a good place to learn how to write in.
So you were basically training for a fight that you never knew was going to come or not come, but when it finally came, you were ready.
Oh, yeah, I'd been doing like Brazilian jiu-jitsu for 20 years with
in a basement somewhere. No one knew who you were.
Yeah, I was like, I was just bringing guys in and breaking their necks. There'd be no fucking witnesses. So by the time I was fully evolved, I really was. I had honed it to a fine point, and in in a total obscurity.
That's awesome.
A lot of people, you get into it. The problem I see with like getting into, graduating from college, getting that first job, you reach a point where you're pulling down a 6-figure paycheck and you kind of go, well, I guess I know everything I need to know about writing, and your development as an artist just stops. The other thing is I had 25, well, by the time I did, I had 4 decades plus of living I'd done, and I had a lot of experiences, and I had a lot to draw on versus some guy who's 20 years old and he has I had a really bad breakup in high school. There was that time I got kicked in the nards in
seventh grade.
Seventh grade. I mean, there's just there's not a lot of complexity to what you can look back on at 22 years old. Whereas at 45, I had 3 kids.
I know the feeling.
There'd been health problems. There'd been a million things, and so it's like I could draw on all of that.
Now, you also acted as a showrunner on a few shows. Can you tell which shows you worked on specifically as a showrunner?
I was never really the showrunner on Carnivàle, but I was kind of the showrunner by default on Carnivàle because the second season Ron went away to do Battlestar Galactica, and I was basically the head writer. I was doing everything a showrunner does, but at the end of the day, there was another executive producer who was handling most of the post-production and calling certain shots. So I wasn't really a pure showrunner, but I was making a lot of creative decisions, and a lot of the crew were making end runs around the other guy to say, "Hey, we're trying to get a decision. He hasn't, and he's putting this one to committee, and we really need to know now." And I'd say, "Just do this," So, I know what a showrunner's job was, and so I know that in the second season I was the de facto showrunner.
Now, what does a showrunner do exactly for the audience so they understand?
The showrunner is basically responsible for, first of all, pretty much all the scripts and the trajectory of what's going on in the writing room and the story of what's being submitted to the network, dealing with all the notes that come back from the network, dealing with the production issues that come up, looking at drawings of sets that are going to be built and signing off on those. You're signing off on everything. You're generally working directly with your key crew and your line producers to just make sure that everything's running, that all the trains are running on time, and doing what you can do to make their job, I would say easier. But sometimes I think just to make their job possible. I mean, this is pyramid building, and you're building a new pyramid every week, and you're building each pyramid from the factory floor up, and so there's a lot of details that need attending to. You're also, you're delegating a lot. You can't be, you can't have your hand in everything. You just have to make sure that the right people who reflect and understand your vision for things are in the slots, Now,
can you talk a little bit about the writer's room and what it's like to be in that writer's room for people who have never been in a writer's room?
Well, I've been in both. I've been in two kinds. There's really only two kinds of writers' rooms. There's lots of different kinds of writers' rooms. There's writers' rooms that work and writers' rooms that don't work. There's where the shows that I've run. The shows that I've been in charge of the writer's room, I take great pride in when I'm running a room, it's running on all cylinders. And you have 5 or 6 writers in a room, and usually a writer's assistant taking notes. You're using cards or whiteboards, and you're breaking story. Your job is to sit as a group and break story. And to me, the key is, first of all, everybody has to feel safe. They have to feel like they're not going to be ridiculed if they come up with something silly. One thing that I really like, Ron Moore brought this to our room in Carnivàle, and according to him, it's an old Gene Roddenberry trick. Is a thing called a stupid stick, and you designate something. It can be anything. It can just be an object. And if you pick this thing up and you hold it and pitch something, nobody can make fun of you. It's got supernatural powers.
That's awesome.
So, and often it's the stupid stick pitch that really breaks the dam. Like, usually the reaction is, you shouldn't have picked up the stupid stick. That's actually really smart. Or it'll be, yeah, that's stupid, but, if we did that, which it just breaks a log jam. And I mean, really the key to me of successfully running a room And I think I love analogies, but the best analogy I've found for a writer's room is, you're drawing juice, you're drawing story out of the ether as a writer. It's bubbling up through your story well. It's being informed by your own experiences. It's being filtered by your own experiences and interpreted by your own experiences. But that story comes from somewhere else. I truly believe the more I do this, that writers and artists of all stripe are the only people on earth that are actually in daily in daily communication with supernatural. I mean, it's something else. I can't tell you how many times I've written something and gone, where the fuck did that come from?
Oh yeah.
Holy shit. Like that didn't come out of me, and it's nothing I've ever seen, and it's nothing I've ever experienced, for God's sake. And it's coming from somewhere else. And so you're basically a light bulb, and there's a power station down the street. I look at it as, to keep the power station thing going, is like you're driving through the desert here in California, and there's, you're out towards Nevada, and there's these solar collectors. Mm-hmm. And it's, hundreds of mirrors on the desert floor, all of those mirrors focused on a heat element at the top of a tower that is, moving turbines down below. And I look at it as a good writer's room is all the people are taking that mojo, that story mojo, that juice, and sort of focusing it on, on the person who's running the room. And it's like, it's amplifying everybody there. You can't, if you have a good, well-run writer's room, nobody can really remember who came up with what.
Right.
It becomes a pure hive mind. And I'm not just saying it because I like Star Trek, but it becomes a hive mind. And there's only one writer in the room. There really is only one writer in the room, but he's the combination of, the 4 or 6 or 12 writers that are all sitting in the room, focusing their mirrors at that center point, which is just, forging the story. And it all kind of melds together, and so it's not, the 12 equals 1, 12 creates one writer, and that takes immense trust, and in the process, and measured generosity, and more than that, just making sure it's fun. And because creation is play. Creation is play at a very high level, yes, but it's no different than, like 6 kids in a sandbox, right, with playing with trucks, or Army Man or something. You're in a state of play, and you need to make people feel like good.
If not, that play's not. Yeah, because if you're making kids not feel fun, they're not going to play in that sandbox.
What they're going to do is they're going to retreat to their corners and pound. And I've seen that happen in writers' rooms. I mean, there's writers' rooms where it's like, it's just, everybody's just staring a hole in the whiteboard, and it's like, what if we, what? Oh, yeah. It's like just so constipated.
Right.
Just, oh my God. I've been in rooms like that, and it's just like, and usually it's a function of people at the top.
Yeah, usually is.
It's a trickle down effect of the way that ideas are received. Shows like that are not fun,
Now, let me ask you a question. How do you deal with studio notes or notes in general from people who have not sat and bled on the paper like you have or on your laptop to build that story?
Well, first of all, I keep in mind that everybody involved wants to make the material good. Now, you'd argue there's probably a few people out there that just want to get their fingerprints on it, and there's a good argument for that. Mm-hmm. It's like they want to be able to turn to their wife and see, hey, see that sweater? I picked that sweater out for that actress or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that's more the exception to the rule. Everybody is just dying to make something great, and sometimes if it's coming from people who don't understand the process, like executives, it may not be as well articulated as it would be if you were getting it from another writer, And thank God for that, because if they were capable of articulating it as well as a writer, they wouldn't need us. So that said, I'd say, I read every year I see some article and some basically on the internet or whatever, some blog or some screenwriting magazine and be like, the dumbest notes I ever got. And it's a bunch of writers talking about the dumbest note I ever got. And to this day, I've never seen anybody write one saying the smartest note I ever got. Because I can tell you, for every really stupid note I've gotten one where I'm kicking myself in the ass on my way home going, why the hell didn't I think of that? Mm-hmm. Sometimes people come up with things where it's like, oh, wow, you're absolutely right. I think the biggest problem is a lot of the notes, a lot of executives, they want to pitch a solution. They perceive a problem, and they tend to frame their notes as solutions to problems they perceive. Mm-hmm. So it'll be, hey, do this, and you're kind of going, huh? Like and it's like if there's any executives listening or any future executives, the best thing to do is just frame the problem first. You know what I mean? The second act, or and be as specific as you can. This really bumps for me, this particular moment, or the second scene kind of drags, or it seems like this one character disappears in the second act, and frame the problem. Don't try to just pitch a solution, because the solution, it's sort of like, you got a doctor, there's only one doctor in the room, and then you got a bunch of people who are standing around in the room, and they bring a patient in and he's bleeding from the ears, and everybody says, for God's sake, put cotton in his ears and put some Band-Aids on his ears are bleeding. And you're the doctor, and you're going, no, actually that's indication of, like, that's intracranial bleeding, and we really have to get him into an MRI and see what's going on with his brain, and it's not a Band-Aid on the ears situation. Sometimes it's better just to point out, hey, he's bleeding from the ears, not, hey, put some Band-Aids on his ears.
Right.
It's just better to frame the problem or point out the problem than propose a solution. You
are good at analogies, by the way. You are very good at analogies.
Thank you. I should open up a little store.
You should just sell analogies.
Analogies for us.
Now, what is the biggest mistake you see first-time screenwriters make?
The biggest mistake screenwriters make, I would say the biggest mistake all writers, new writers make, and even a few that are like along the way, is not recognizing. A lot of people go, if I get it really good the first time, it'll save me time on editing. I can edit and write at the same time. I can multitask. I can work with my iPad and watch TV at the same time. So I can edit and write at the same time. And then they sit down, and really editing is using a completely different part of your brain than writing. It's as different as the difference between, I'm doing an analogy, but it's as different as the difference between skiing and eating a banana.
Right.
It's like they have nothing to do with each other. Now, I suppose you could ski while you're eating a banana.
Not well.
The thing is, it's like, it's really, they're mutually exclusive activities. And what I find is the effect is, like, when people do that and they go, wait, that's where you get into it was a dark and stormy night. Oh, no, that sucks. It was a shadowy and rainy night. That's worse. And this is the recipe for complete writer's block and paralysis, where you're trying to make qualitative decisions about things that are just dumping out of your head. Okay. Right. You cannot do it. You cannot do that. You can't do it. It is like like pegging the accelerator and the brake on your car at the same time. You're going to make shitloads of noise and a lot of smoke, but the car ain't going anywhere. Okay. And so it's like understand that, when you sit down to write, you write like you're being pursued through the jungle by a bunch of guys with machetes. You don't think about it. You can be thinking, oh, this is shit. I know it's shit, but I've got to get through this scene. Okay, I know what the next scene's going to be. And just get through it. Get through it. Write forward. For Christ's sake, when you sit down to write, don't sit down and read everything you've written before you write. Okay, because now you're editing again. Stop that. No. So you just sit down, you read the last few words, and you go, oh, yeah, that's where I left off, and you just pick it up. And you have to write like you're just and it's okay if you go off of your outline. That's all right. If something happens and the character takes you in a direction you didn't expect to go, great, okay, and sometimes those are great moments. And so go ahead, but as long as you get back onto onto the path again and arrive at your trajectory, arrive at your ending, but just get that first draft out, get it out as quickly as humanly possible, and I can guarantee you that the parts that you thought while you were writing them were just shit on ice, actually you'll reread them and you go, well, this isn't bad. And the stuff you thought where you were, oh my God, I must be channeling, Eugene O'Neill, it's just garbage, And so it's like you have no way of knowing how well you're doing while you're creating. You can't be, so that's another reason. So my advice to writers is understand that process and understand editing and writing and editing, the creative process and the editing process are two completely different things. And and don't try to multitask that. It never goes well.
I actually heard a great analogy from a songwriter, which I think is an amazing analogy for writing, which is like when you go into an old house and you turn on the pipes and all you see is that mud come out. You just got to let it go and let that mud keep flowing out of the pipes, out of this faucet. And then sooner or later, it starts getting lighter and lighter and lighter to the point where then you're getting clear water that you can actually drink, but you have to get through all that other stuff first, or else you won't get to the good stuff. So
you just have to, it's an ugly, messy, smelly process.
There's nothing glamorous about being an artist a lot of times. It really isn't. Not when you're a real creative.
When I'm one of those rare birds. A lot of people are like, they hate writing. They're tortured. They're sitting in front of I've seen guys sitting there frowning at their screens and doing this. I'm happy and giddy and stupid when I'm writing. I'm just like laughing. I'm like I'm just sitting here making faces, going, "Oh God, look, they're all going to be crying here. This is going to be so great."
Well, you actually just said that right when we got on the line. You were like, "I'm writing a ghost story." Like you were so happy about it when you said it.
That's because I love this process. I there's tons of love on the page. I just adore writing. I'm not one of those guys that's like, yes, well, I like having written. Yeah, it's like I like the process. I like doing it. It's one, it's funny. There's that, I forget what it is. It's some recent, one of those self-help business type books. And they made this proposal. They go, if you do any endeavor or activity for 10,000 hours,
yes,
you'll become. And it's like, okay, so if you want to be a concert pianist, you just have to play for 10,000 hours. What he doesn't say is that if you didn't like playing the piano,
right,
you'd have to be the world's dumbest asshole to waste 10,000 hours of your life doing something you don't like doing. People who spend 10,000 of their hours of their life mastering some art or craft or science or whatever they master, they have to love it. You have to love doing that.
But there's a lot of people that don't. A lot of people who go to school.
You have to love some aspect of it.
Should.
But, I mean, a lot of people fall in love with the idea of being a writer, But I meet writers every day that have never written a word. They're just natural raconteurs. They're really good at telling stories. They're just, and it's like where I go, for God's sake, I wish you'd sit down and write a book or something because you're really good, And then I meet people who are writers and they're making very good money. I've worked with people who are writers, and it's like they're not writers. They've worked out the craft. They understand what follows what, but they're not really writers. They're just regurgitating things they've seen and putting a spin on everything to make it a little fresh enough to where everybody doesn't,
get scared.
Go, yeah.
That's very interesting because sometimes you see these movies or you watch these shows and you're like, wow, it's just the same stuff. And I've met writers too. I've met writers and filmmakers for that matter who do exactly what you did. They understand the craft. They're technicians. But I could put the paint on canvas and I know how to do it and I know the technique, but I'm not Da Vinci. I'm not Van Gogh. I'm not being brave. I'm not being, I'm not going out there without a net.
Well, yeah, but that's just, maybe that's the cards that are dealt you. Not everybody is, I mean, there's probably guys painting pictures from, photographs down at the mall that, from a craft and from a craft standpoint, as far as mixing colors and laying down paint, are probably, highly evolved, but there's directors like that. I won't name any names, but there's directors that are absolutely masterful, but it's just not quite substantial. It's hard to put your finger on it, but it's like there's a sense of a missing depth to it.
Yeah, you read my mind. Yeah,
that somebody like Kubrick brings to the party, or Scorsese, or where there's something really to it, and
there's something underneath that. There's like 50 layers underneath, and you will only see it in 20 or 30 years of watching the movie. That you'll
Kubrick.
Yeah, Kubrick's my favorite.
He was aware of what he was doing and everything, but he wasn't aware of everything he was doing. And no artist really is. A lot of it, you're just doing your best, and it's coming in that way. But you really have no idea, why it works that way. You're just focusing on trying to articulate your vision as well as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I
you go to college lit classes and you get some clown, up in front. He's your college lit teacher, and he's trying to tell you what was going through Herman Melville's head when he was writing, Moby Dick, or Stephen Crane's head when he was writing Red Badge of Courage. And he was thinking about this, and he was working with symbolism over here. And I tell people, I go, I can tell you what was going through Herman Melville's head when he wrote Moby Dick. It was like, I got to feed my family, and this thing's due in a couple of months. It's like, that's what was going through Herman Melville's head. It's
right.
Like, I got to pay bills,
Right.
You're doing the best you can. You're running through the jungle with the guys with the machetes behind you. That's what's happening.
It's funny because Kubrick's one of my favorite artists of all time. And there's so much, I mean, there's volumes, libraries written about what people think he was doing in 2001 and in The Shining and all of those. And did you see the documentary Film Worker?
I know.
It's his assistant.
I did see that. Yeah.
Wasn't it wonderful? Wasn't it wonderful? But you hear him, and he was the guy that was literally next to him for 30 years. And he's like, the twins in Shining? Well, that was me. I brought twins in, and Kubrick said, shh, well, I guess they're twins now. Where everybody's like, and there's twins because back in the day he shot some photos of twins and they're putting up. I'm like, no, it just happened to be that way. Huh?
There was the first episode of Carnivàle. It's called Milfay, right? Mm-hmm. And I decided, when I first created the show, I wanted to name each episode after each city they were in. We didn't do that the first year. We did it in the second year, Mm-hmm. But I titled the episode Milfay, And the way I found it is I got a period map of the Dust Bowl and sort of looked at dots on the map and found a little tiny dot named Milfay, and I went, oh, I like that. And so that's what I titled it. So then we make it, and like 2 years later, it's on TV, and people are talking about it on the internet and going back and forth with their interpretations and stuff. And some guy says, well, you do know, and MILFE is an anagram for family. And I'm going, wow, I'm a genius, man. But it was like, I couldn't have been thinking about that. I'm not going to be thinking about stuff like that, when I'm making creative, because I'm making 10,000 creative decisions in the course of a screenplay. It's 10,000 decisions to make. You can't be thinking on that level about every one. You'd never finish. You'd still be writing the pilot today.
No, so when Carnivàle came out, the internet was definitely off and running. It was already around for a little bit, but then the message boards and all that stuff was going on back then heavily. And I remember people just, because there wasn't as much content flying around as there is today.
Yeah.
And they really delved into the deepness of Carnivàle. How is it as a creator? I've always wanted to hear this, as a creator, to go on and just read them like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. Like Woody Allen was like,
I know, because like I said, people have different interpretations for different things.
Sure.
That's nobody does that when they're talking about CSI or NCIS.
Right.
Or even shows like House, Right. They're not even really doing stuff like that on The Sopranos so much. But the minute they start to interpret stuff, symbolism and so forth, what things really mean, connections between different elements, as soon as people start doing that, now that's what people do about art. Okay? And that means you succeeded and you've made art. It's not just a TV show. You've made art. And so that was the biggest thing. I mean, I'm not going to say, oh, you're wrong, because they could be right. I mean, to me, it's there's a collaboration happening between the artist and the audience. If the audience draws something out of it that the artist didn't intend, does that mean it's not there? Absolutely not.
That's a great perspective.
Well, yeah, why wouldn't it? It should be. If it's open to multiple interpretations, that's a good thing. That's because you're reaching different people in different ways. It's almost like the story in the Bible of the apostles speaking tongues or something. Everybody's hearing a different language. That's fine. That's good.
Well, it's to go back to Kubrick. Every one of his movies has been interpreted 1,000 different ways, and will continue to be interpreted for decades and decades to come in different ways.
That's because his work is art. Which brings me to my poetry. I should pitch my poetry.
Please pitch your poetry. Yeah, I was going to ask you what's next on your plate.
Well, I'm doing a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's like I've been creating shows that don't go on. You can check them all out. I mean, it's like people go, well, gosh, you haven't done anything. You haven't created anything since Carnivàle. It's like, no, I've created like a bunch of shows, and for I don't know why. I mean, I reread a bunch of them, and I was saying, this is good. This could go tomorrow. I don't know what the deal is. But I've got a site called Knauf TV, and you can see it's unusual because you can see the actual pilots in their entirety on some of the projects. There's another thing called the Bible, which we talked about earlier in the show, and you very rarely get to see show Bibles on the internet. This will give you an idea of what a Bible looks like what a show Bible looks like. So it's a nice resource for new writers. And then there's these things we call decks, which are sort of like anywhere between an 11 and 15 page version of a Bible, like mostly sizzle, very little steak, just giving. It's the kind of thing they call leave behind. You might take it to a pitch meeting with you and leave something behind for the executives to pass up the chain of command. So there's some of those too. So they're helpful selling things, and that's all on Knauf, KNAUF.TV. And
I'll put it in the show notes.
The other thing is I started writing poetry again. I wrote poetry when I first started writing when I was an art major, and then I flipped over to creative writing, and I was drawn to that. I did a lot of poetry and worked with a lot of great poets or teachers. That was where I sort of cut my teeth. And I started writing again about 6-7 years ago, and for like 5 years I was writing these poems and just posting them on Facebook. I would just post them on Facebook. And because it's like, who gets paid for writing plays? What am I going to submit it to?
Poetry magazine?
Yeah. Poetry. Yeah. Jugs.
Poetry, the Jugs of Poetry magazine.
Yeah. It's a wee magazine. Does that still even exist?
I don't know.
And so I just posted them, and this woman was actually collecting them. And she contacted me and said, you've got like 35 poems. And I thought, wow, maybe we should do a book. So I called another person I knew as a publisher, and she said, I would love to publish poems by you. And so we did this thing. It's called NoHo Gloaming. If you go on my Facebook page or Twitter, you'll find it. If you go on the net and you want to find it, just put in Clash Books is the publisher. Mm-hmm. CLASH Books. And the book is NoHo, NoHo, Gloaming, GLOAMING. And there's links all over my social networks and so forth. And it's about as pure. I mean, it's like when you do TV, like we're talking about the note process. Your vision is mitigated by a lot of people. You know, it's very rare where you get really the raw stuff up, mm-hmm. because it takes so many people just to make these damn things. You know, and you know everybody's. You know, it's going to waver from the way you might have imagined it. You know, even down to props and camera angles. And it's all a myriad of details. And it was so nice to return to a form where I'm creating the end result right there on a page. And and it's very approachable. It's not if you don't if you think of poetry the way I think of mimes, okay? And you're allergic to poetry and you're going, it's not this precious stuff. It's very relatable. I believe people read it and they'll connect very deeply with it. Mm-hmm. There's one poem at the end that's an epic poem that's just crazy and kind of funny, and it's the story of a guy in the witness protection program. I'm not writing about ravens and angels and dead king
trees.
Shit.
Right.
Yeah, I'm writing about stuff like Citgo gas stations and stuff.
Right.
My influences were Charles Bukowski and this whole Los Angeles Beyond Baroque school. And it's very down to earth and sort of grounded, straight up stuff. And,
That's awesome.
And sometimes amusing and sometimes moving. So I urge you to check out my poetry. If you like my TV, you'll really like that.
Awesome. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a screen?
Is this that thing on the actors thing?
Yes, exactly. It's just like the actors to do.
Odd type shit? Don't do that to me. I'm not going to do it.
It's not going to be. If you were a tree. No, I'm joking. What advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to break into the business today?
I would say the best thing you can do is skip film school and just start shooting film. Because you can do that. I couldn't do that when I was starting out. As a
filmmaker.
Yeah, I would. Film school, you will learn everything you learn in 4 years of film school in 5 days on a set.
Pretty much.
Film school is the world's biggest waste of money unless you go to UCLA or NYU or USC.
Yeah.
And otherwise, if you're going to some other college to get a communications degree or film degree or that, you are totally wasting your time. If you want to be a filmmaker, take 25, tell your parents, say, okay, I want to take 25% of what you would spend on a college and I want to make a movie with it. Just make movies, write them, get your friends together. If somebody has a good eye, make him the director. Just go out and start making movies. You might not monetize, but you'll get from here to there much faster than you will if you go to film school for 4 years.
And how about screenwriting?
For screenwriting, I think the most important thing I would tell a writer who wants to be a dramatist, which is a very specific kind of writing. People think that, novelists think, I can adapt this into a script. They usually can. It's very specific. Shakespeare was an actor before he was a writer, and I didn't really learn how to be a dramatist until I studied acting. And I studied acting by accident. I thought I wanted to be a director. And so one of my second mentor, who was really important in my development, was a guy named Cliff Osmond, who was an acting coach. He was Armand Assante's acting consultant. And I met him on a set, and we got to be good friends. And I said, I want to take some of your classes because I want to learn about the process so I can interact with actors as a director. And what I did was I ended up learning how to write. I really learned. I was really good at packing the trunk, and I knew how to break a story and figure out what follows this and what follows that. When it came to my character work, I was faking it until I studied acting. And you'll learn. One thing you learn in acting is to act in the moment. Now, if you got stage fright, I have terrible stage fright. When I'm playing somebody other than myself, I can get up in front of a zillion people being Dan Knauf. But if I'm playing a character, it's scary. I just can't build that fourth wall. But when I'm alone in a room, I can. And I'm writing in the moment. My scene work feels like I'm just taking transcription. I know my characters so well. I know what they're saying. All I'm doing is just trying to keep up with them while they're talking, going through a scene. I never am going, what would he say there? What would she then say? Another thing I'd say to young actors or young writers is that sort of attached to that is if you're going to a place like that and you're going, what would I say if I was in that situation? What would I say if somebody said that to me? Is nobody really gives a fuck what you would say, okay? Because you're really not interesting. Actors aren't doers. Actors are watchers. You're boring, just boring people. And so nobody cares what you'll say. You have to understand your character and what the character would say. They all have to have different voices. They have to be real, So again, I would really strongly suggest spending at least a couple of years, in any way you can, in whatever resource your town or city has, getting up and studying acting and doing scenes and seeing how hard it is. And it also helps you develop a really strong respect for the actor and how hard they're. And that's something that's sorely lacking with many writers in Hollywood, where I'll hear them going, oh, yeah, that guy, he's a shitty actor. He sucks. And it's like, has it occurred to you that, you're writing shitty stuff for him to say? Like, there's no way to make him work well, asshole. Right.
If Meryl Streep was saying it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get to where you write, and when you're in there and you're working with actors, actors, you get to understand the kind of stuff that actors want to say, the kinds of moments actors want to play. And if you know that and you get them on your side, I mean, that's good. That's something that's going to make you stand out,
Now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career?
The book that had the biggest impact on my life or my career or and my career?
Or.
Either or. I would say at this point, I was a late comer to it. Was let me think. There's so many of them.
Whichever one comes to your mind.
The Alchemist.
Oh, of course, I love The Alchemist. It's one of my favorite books.
It's an astonishing book.
Piece of work.
And I think everybody should read it. It should be required.
It should be required for everybody in the world, but especially those who are artists. I think
but I think for everybody.
I think so too.
I think it's about as close a thing to if Homo sapiens came with an owner's manual, it would be The Alchemist.
I agree with you. I would agree with you. Good answer. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
That I'm not always right. That sometimes I've been in situations where I'm absolutely sure something's not going to work, and that person has higher rank than I do, so they're the ones who get to call the shot. And I'm thinking, this is going to not work. It's not going to work as well as the way I would have done it. And then all of a sudden I watch it and it works beautifully, and I go, you know what? I was wrong. It's like, this is the way, just because it's the way you would do it doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And when it comes to a collaborative art, passion rules the day. And, what it boils down to is the person who's most passionate is probably going to win that fight. Don't get hung up on little stuff. If people want this change, the worst place you can go, the least productive, most toxic place you can go is to this place that almost every shitty writer goes, which is, they're trying to wreck my work, and it's like, they're dumping shitloads of money into this and they just want to wreck it because they don't like you. They're mean people. They want to make you foolish, let's go, come on, for God's sake. Sometimes another way does work, and sometimes it works even a little better than the way you had in mind. Just don't think that you're ever going to watch something that is exactly the movie you had in your mind when you conceived it and wrote it. It's always going to be a little different. Some parts are going to be better. Some parts you might wince at. Hopefully the former is more numerous than the latter,
Very good. And then the toughest question of all, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Oh, that is tough. North by Northwest, I love that film.
Amazing.
I think, let's see, there's a lot of them. I'm just going to see what pops into my head. Oh, Casablanca, of course. And then I think it's really kind of a dead heat between Chinatown.
Oof, great movie.
And The Shining.
Oh,
I really
love The Shining.
But I can name a dozen more movies.
Of course.
As those 4.
Right, so. Exactly. That just came into your mind right now. No, I agree with you 100%. And
everything by David Lynch. Does that count?
Everything by Kubrick, everything by David Lynch.
And every other movie by the Coen brothers. It's like that.
It is every other You're right. It is almost every other movie. But when they hit it out of the park.
I know.
But when they strike out, but you know what, though?
No, even when they strike out, it's an interesting strikeout.
That's what I was about to say. Even when they strike out, at least they're going to places that is pushing them creatively in places that we might have never even been to. So for every No Country for Old Men, there might be a lady killer.
Hey, do you do editing on this thing after you're done?
I do not.
You don't? We go straight through?
I can't.
I'm going to say, honey, keep it down. I'm on the radio.
No, my audience is used to this, so it's all good. Don't worry. And then where can people find you?
She just dropped her purse on the table. It probably sounded like the bomb.
It's all good. It's all good. Now, where can people find you and your work?
People can find all of these things I've done at Knauf TV, and then you can find my stuff. I'm pretty active on Twitter and the social networks. There's interviews. Just Google my ass.
And you'll pop up.
Google Daniel Knauf. Don't Google my ass.
Because
you can find me all over the place. And as far as what I'm doing right now I finished up, I did 3 years on the Blacklist, and I'm kind of been doing a lot of development. So I'm between jobs.
Okay.
What's it? As Henry in Eraserhead would say, I'm on a vacation. I'm on a vacation.
You're on sabbatical, sir. You're on sabbatical.
A psychic sabbatical, sure.
Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for being so kind and generous with your time. Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
I want to thank Daniel for dropping some major knowledge bombs on the tribe today and sharing his experiences, his unique experiences as a showrunner and a writer. And guys, if you want to get notes to anything we discussed in this episode, just head over to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/BPS 888-888-8029. There I'll have links and contact information, all that kind of good stuff on Daniel and his work. And if you guys haven't checked it out already, please head over to indiefilmhustle.tv and check out the screenwriting section of the streaming service. It is amazing. We've got new lectures, new courses going up every month. We now just added season 3 of The Dialogue, which has some of the biggest screenwriters in Hollywood working today, sharing about an hour and a half interview about how they do their process, the ins and outs of the business, and so on. And it's a great, great series. And I've seen all of the episodes, and we'll be putting out another 3 or 4 seasons coming up in the months to come. But it's really, really great, among other interviews and other lectures and things like that we have on the service. So definitely check that out, guys. And that's it for another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. If you haven't gone, go to screenwritingpodcast.com and leave us a good review on iTunes. It really, really, really helps the show out a lot and gets it out there to more and more people. So thank you again for all the support, guys. And as always, keep on writing no matter what. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast at bulletproofscreenplay.com. That's BULLETPROOFSCREENPLAY.com.